Hi, my name is Pete Weichlein. I'm the CEO of FMC, the Former Members of Congress Association, and welcome to this webcast, videocast that FMC is producing in partnership with the Fulcrum. We are very appreciative of what has now been a number of videocasts we were able to put together. And the reason they work so well, and lots of you are watching them, is because we have the ability to bring former members of Congress from both sides of the aisle together for a conversation on the topics that concern all of us. And today certainly is no exception to that. As a matter of fact, what we'd like to chat about today is the overall question whether extremists in Congress are hogging all the spotlight. And in order to have that conversation, we have two completely non-extremist former members of Congress. Really excited to be joined by Mike Capuano, who is a former member from the great state of Massachusetts, and as a Democrat, served in Congress for 20 years from 1999 to 2019. And former member Phil Gingrey, a Republican former member from also the great state of Georgia, who served from 2003 to 2015. And for those of you tuning in, if this is, if you're hoping to find a shouting match and people's faces getting very red, this is not the video cast for you. I'm sure you can find lots of that in other spots. What we are really good at is having productive, pragmatic conversations between former elected officials. And let me just jump right into it. So, you know, we're talking about extremists in the political sense, and I guess in order to start the conversation, one needs to kind of define what's extreme these days. In my mind, at least, it's either an action or advocating for a policy that most of us look at as unreasonable, you know, maybe even something offensive. And you know, people who are promulgating that seem to be having more and more success getting the spotlight as they're doing so. And I'm just wondering whether, especially with you, Mike, 20 years starting back in 1999, whether I just have revisionist, you know, history, and I'm looking at everything through, you know, these bipartisan purple lenses that say, man, just like 10 years ago, life was so much better on Capitol Hill. So you can answer that question much better than I.
Well, I don't look at it in those terms, what's better and what's worse. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, right now, partisanship is at its peak, in my lifetime anyway. And for me, the question is why? How do we get here? And how do we get out of it? And how long will it last? And is it going to get worse or is it going to get better? I have to believe it's going to get better. And I say that because, you know, I think anybody in politics has to have some love of history. And the history shows us very clearly that partisanship is not new. It's been in politics, not just in the United States and not in the Congress, but everywhere. Even before there were parties in the United States Congress, there was partisanship. You know, John Adams didn't get along with Thomas Jefferson. They weren't Democrats or Republicans in those days. All that being said, for me, I think it's lots of different things. Social media is part of it, the speed of today's life. If I had to say it's one thing that has done it, it is the withdrawal from the political process, particularly primaries, the withdrawal by the average voter. I think that the vast majority of people are reasonable people that will have a discussion. They're not going to scream at each other. They will have disagreements, and strong ones and important ones on big issues, but they'll respect their neighbor and, you know, have a fight about it, but a reasonable fight. And too many of those people have left the primary process. What that ends up doing is it leaves the primaries to attract only the most vociferous and dedicated and hardcore believers of whatever the issue is of the day for each party. And I think that's an overstatement, obviously, to make the point. But I think this happened way too often. The Republicans nominate people that are way more conservative than the average Republican I know. And the Democrats have started nominating some people who are way more liberal than the average Democrat that I know. And again, I'm speaking as a liberal Democrat by any measure of the term. But even as a liberal Democrat, I never ran for office saying I'm going to get everything I want. I ran for office saying, here's what I believe in, here's what I'm going to push for. But some progress in our definition of the term is better than no progress. So therefore, yeah, I'll make a deal. I'll tell you when I make a deal. I'll tell you, yep, we didn't get the whole loaf. We only got 40%, 50%, 60%, whatever it was. And then you have to make a judgment. You, the voter, have to make a judgment as to whether that's sufficient. And if you, the voter, say, nope, if you don't get 100%, you're a bad person, and therefore I'll never vote for you again, you're going to end up, again, it's not everything we have. I think it's also a misconception that because the big media people today love that controversy, they won't put people like me and Phil on TV because we're not going to yell at each other. I'm not going to call Phil a name. I'm not going to call his family a name. And we can disagree, but I guess that doesn't sell TV ads. That I don't know. I'll leave that to smarter people than me. But the people that you see on TV more often than not are the most partisan people from the Democratic and Republican Party, and are willing to say things that even when I agree with them, the way they say them sometimes make me cringe. And again, I still consider myself a very liberal person on most policy issues, but that doesn't mean I hate or want to squash every conservative I meet. I would actually rather make a deal with them if I can. If I can't, sure, I'll defeat them. But in the final answer, I don't think Phil's a bad guy just because he's wrong all the time. I just think, okay, my job is to move it along. If we get a deal, we can make a deal. If not, there's another one tomorrow to be made on another important issue. So for me, it's an oversimplification. But if I had to put it on one thing, it's the withdrawal of the average voter from the primary process that allows the most extreme elements of both parties to then nominate the most extreme members. Again, it's an overstatement, clearly and unequivocally, but I think it makes the point as well as I know how to do it.
Yeah, I think Mike really hit the nail on the head, and I'm not going to say that we're going to agree on everything over the next 45 minutes, but certainly I agree with his opening remarks. The history of partisanship is not new, and we all are familiar reading history of politics with the situation, the case where a South Carolina member of Congress went over to the Senate side and nearly beat to death a senator from Massachusetts. I think I'm correct on that.
That's right.
The senator almost died, didn't, but I don't think the member from South Carolina was even sanctioned in any way. Certainly wasn't suspended from Congress because of his actions. And this was probably over I'm going to guess the issue of slavery, but in any regard, this, Mike said, this history of partisanship been going on for a long time. I hadn't thought in sort of preparing for this podcast, if you will, I hadn't thought about the point that Mike just made about the primary process, and that in many cases, reasonable people are sort of tuning out in the primary. They've already made up their mind that they're going to, in the general election, they're going to be voting for the Democratic nominee, or in cases, let's say my congressional district in Georgia, the old 11th in Northwest Georgia, they just knew that they were going to vote for me in the general election, no matter who the Democrats nominated. And maybe in some cases, Mike is right, they stay out of the primary process. And I think that's probably happening more and more now. And so you do get, I mean, you think about his own situation, a great respected, well-respected senior member of his congressional delegation in his last reelect, just unbelievable in my opinion, viewing that from the state of Georgia, that Mike wasn't reelected. And there have been many other cases like that I have seen where I'm just shocked that the more far left, or in the case of Republican primaries, the more far right, let's say my own congressional district in Northwest Georgia, the current representative. And so we're seeing more and more of that. And as far as the media is concerned, you know, if it bleeds, it reads. And so they love to have these members either on the far right or the far left. They love to have them as talking heads or guest commentators and ask them the kind of poking the stick at them to encourage them to maybe say god awful things about the other side. So I do believe it's getting worse. I think Mike may have already made that point. I don't think it can get any worse. God, I hope not. I think we've reached a point where it's just really, really bad. And when I run into the former constituents of mine that at the golf course or in the grocery store or at church or whatever, and they ask me, well, what's wrong with you guys? This is absolutely nuts. And I'm kind of at a loss of what to say to them. You know, it's a sad situation.
And Phil, I'm glad you mentioned your former constituents, because of course Georgia, lots of races going on right now in Georgia. Georgia has, thanks to the 2020 election, become a focal point for lots of people. I'm sure lots of outside money is flowing into Georgia. I'm sure lots of political consultants from all political persuasions are gathering in Georgia. So how much is that turning voters off? I mean, when you say you're running into constituents on the golf course, and Mike made that exact point, are folks just kind of shaking their heads saying, I want nothing to do with this process? You know, you guys do your thing and I'll just focus on the Army Navy game, that kind of thing.
Well, going back to November 3rd, 2020, and January 5th, 2021, that time period, almost 7.5, 8 weeks between the general election, and of course we were electing 2 United States senators, not 1. That's a very unusual, arcane situation that we don't have time to get into as to how that occurred. But in the general election, the 2 Republican senators, incumbents both, received, if you aggregate the total number of Republican votes in the general on November 3rd versus the total number of Democratic votes on November the 3rd, both Senator David Perdue, former Senator David Perdue, and former Senator Kelly Loeffler, both had more votes on November the 3rd than did Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff. But 7.5 weeks later, the number of votes, at this point, of course, it was just 1 Democrat and 1 Republican in each of those races, but the Republicans lost over 250,000 votes during that period of time. Both Senator David Perdue and Senator Kelly Loeffler lost that many votes. So what happened during that period of time? I think, Pete, you made the point, and it's correct, and I firmly believe this is true, that Republican voters just simply got turned off during that period of time. But for whatever reason, I'm not going to try to get into that because I really don't know. There are different theories in regard to that. But they just decided they were so disgusted and they stayed home. Much more so than the Democrats that didn't return to the polls on January the 5th.
So Mike, if we are turning off the voters and we have a system with the primaries where you know, most middle of the road voters who are slightly, you know, center right, center left, they're not engaged anymore. They're staying home on primary day, and the ones who show up are the ones who really want to have that firebrand, that bomb thrower, the place is broken, let's not fix it, let's just blow it up. How do we reverse that narrative? How do we get back to, and I'm sure you have all the answers, so I'm
Sure.
thrilled to have you on this video cast. But how do we re-engage that people recognize their role in all of this?
I wish I knew. I think life goes through a cycle. And I know that, when you read the economic news, and the economy is always the main topic of an election. I mean, everything else comes and goes, and it doesn't mean they don't play. It just means, in the final analysis, voters want whoever they elect to do the best they can so that the voters themselves can live the life that they want to lead. That's really the final analysis. So therefore, when the economy is good, voters tend to focus on other issues, or they stay home, or whatever it might be. So therefore, for me, I think is right now, with all the trouble that we have with the economy, no matter how you measure it, or all the good things, no matter how you measure it, the average person thinks it's okay. And so therefore, they don't have to do it. When the average voter wakes up and finally says, I've had enough, whatever it is, of the far right or the far left or whatever it might be, or just the nonsense, they'll start electing more people that don't find the word compromise to be a swear word. And if on either party, now again, this is not every member, obviously, it's not every district, but all too often, if you went out as a person running for office and said, I embrace the word compromise, I will tell you right up front that I'm going to have to compromise and vote for things that I don't like so that I can get other things that I do like. I will tell you, it's 20 years in Congress. There was not a single significant bill that I ever voted for or against that I completely hated or completely loved. Every major bill I voted for, one way or the other, had stuff I liked and stuff I didn't like. Every time was the stuff I like more or the stuff that I don't like more. And if you go into Congress saying, I am never going to vote for a bill that doesn't have everything I like in it, you'll never vote for anything. Again, though, those people were not anointed. Not a single member of the House of Representatives has ever been appointed. Every single member in the history of the United States has been elected by the people they represent. Once the people that vote get tired of this nonsense, they will start electing more people that understand we all got to get along. This is a big country with different ideas. I don't know how we get there. I mean, look, I could put my finger on social media. I can put my finger on cable news. I think all of that plays into it. But let's be honest, the telephone changed the world dramatically. Automobiles changed the world dramatically. TV, radio, they all changed, and they all brought in new things. I think once this society gets more comfortable with social media and the incredible number of so-called news outlets that we have, and be able to figure out, guess what? This news outlet is a little tilted this way. That one's tilted a little bit the other way. Maybe I'll listen to both of them and try to figure it out myself. I think when that happens, we'll get back to a more reasonable time. And I want to be clear, that will not end partisanship. It will not end the bickering, the difficulties. People forget that Phil and I fought over things that are very important. I don't care who you are. I don't care what side of the issue you fall on. The economy is important. Taxation is important. Abortion is important. Civil rights, civil liberties, international war and peace. These are big, important issues that really lots of us have visceral opinions on. So it shouldn't be surprising. Phil and I, if we get into an issue, we're going to argue. We are going to argue. That doesn't mean I hate him. It doesn't mean I think he's stupid. It just means I think he's wrong. And I'm sure he thinks the same as me. And we try to convince each other, and we try to convince more people that come closer to our opinion. That's the way it's supposed to work. So I actually think in the final analysis, the only way this changes is when the American people finally get fed up with it. And I don't know when that will happen. I wish I could wave a magic wand and have it happen now. But I fear that it's going to be a little longer before we get out of the particular doldrums we're in.
Yeah, I think that it will work itself out in regard to social media, cable news. The reason why today we don't really have a fairness doctrine is because it's not necessary anymore. I mean, when you look at the fact that when the fairness doctrine was eliminated, the broadcast market had grown to something like more than 1,300 TV stations and more than 10,000 radio stations. So, you know, you don't have to worry really anymore about the networks using the airways, the public domain, to have a balance. I know that was a legitimate concern probably in the late 40s, the late 1940s when it was created. But you know, that in a way is another subject matter. But it came up a lot, of course, during the 2020 election when President Trump felt, you know, like that he was being silenced and that sort of thing, and that Section 230 issue that keeps coming back, whether or not the social media platforms of big companies, we all know them, Facebook and Twitter in particular, you know, they're not subject to liability of third-party content. And I don't know how all of that's going to shake out, because there's some pretty rough stuff that people post, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. I'm of the age where I do neither. And I didn't do when Twitter, I guess, really became popular when I was a member. And I remember some of my colleagues saying, oh, you know, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You know, you don't have to worry about buying TV time, or you just get a lot of Twitter followings, and people can keep up with what you're doing, what your thoughts are, what bills you're promoting and or supporting, and it has the potential to be a great thing. But it's turned into, in a way, I think, in some cases, it's turned into something else. But again, it is what it is. And I don't think we're going to change any of that. I think for me, if I were doing it again, of course, I would be very careful. And I think I always was, although you get dinged when you least expect it. All of us do. When you put something out on social media and you try to be reasonable and don't say something bad about somebody's mama, but you still get dinged. I think bottom line, though, I think Mike suggested it. You just feel the pulse of your district, whether that's statewide or a congressional district, and you know how the people feel. And you, of course, have your own personal convictions and principles that may be crosswise with public opinion in your district from time to time, hopefully not often, or you wouldn't get reelected. But you just go back home and you be honest with them and you tell them the truth. And, you know, if somebody in a primary, as we were talking about earlier, is trying to out conservative you or out liberal you, as in Mike's situation, you just stand your ground and say, look, I am who I am, and I'm reasonable, and I'm with you most of the time, but you know, there is a bridge too far. And if it's too far for you guys to reelect me, well, so be it. You know, I'm going to do the best I can and leave it there.
Well, so I always try to end our video cast on a positive note, and I want to especially do that with 10 days before Christmas. So what I'm hearing from you, yes, there clearly are issues here, and we're in a place now where the loudest voices, unfortunately, are the ones that are the most extreme. But there are also pragmatic answers out there. I mean, it's we can discern what the root of the problem is, whether it's social media and you know, truth in reporting, whether it's the connection between constant fundraising and you know, being up for re-election every 2 years. the importance that we've now given to primaries versus the general. I think these are all things that folks much smarter than I are taking a look at and are trying to figure out what some reasonable approaches might be to fix some of these problems. But the most important thing is the extremist voices are in the minority today, and when you were there. I think Congress is populated with public servants who want to find solutions that benefit their communities, who want to find solutions that benefit us as a country. And the vast majority of the members and staffers on Capitol Hill are like you know, folks who are much more interested in legislating and finding solutions that make us a better place. So with that, let me thank both of you for your time and your insight and your input. And I hope you'll join me in feeling slightly optimistic that just like every other time in our history, we'll find a way to get as near to the bottom as possible, and then we'll find a way to turn things around. So thank you both, and happy holidays to both of you, and to our viewers on the Fulcrum. We appreciate you tuning in month after month. Thank you.